Okay, so there were several articles, videos that came out last week that drew my attention and were quite lengthy, but worth the read or the watch. One of them we're going to talk about today. I hope to get to the other two as well. To one of them, I think I'll share. The other one, not so much. Not to say that it's not good, but just I don't think we've talked about what he had to say. Anyway, one was Rabbi David Wolpe gave a speech a couple of weeks ago about at Temple Emmanuel in New York. They run an adult ed cultural program, quite extensive and well endowed. He spoke about anti-Semitism, giving five key points about that. So if you just look for David Wolpe anti-Semitism speech, I'm sure you'll find the YouTube of that. There was an op-ed in the New York Times last week, at least appeared digitally last week, by an Israeli author named David Grossman, about where Israel is now and where it's going in the future. So that's a very, very important, I think, and very disturbing article at the same time. And what I want to share today is a speech that Bari Weiss. I've written about Bari Weiss in my Israel update emails, referring to her and her website, the Free Press, very often. I like what she and her website do when it comes to Israel, anti-Semitism, just their approach to the news and their perspective on it. So she was chosen by 92nd Street Y to give the annual State of American Jewry talk. So maybe you've seen this talk already. If you just go to the Free Press, just go to the archives. It's a talk that she gave in New York on Sunday, February 26th. So just over a week ago. An important talk. Apparently, there were anti-Israel and anti-Semitic protests going on outside of the 92nd Street Y that did not cause the talk to be canceled, but made it very uncomfortable for people going in to be shouted at anti-Semitic slurs. So I think it's an important talk in terms of talking about anti-Semitism and also how we can respond to it. So that's what I wanted to look at today. Again, I encourage you to go to the website. I'll send the link to it when I send the recording of today's session to the listserv. I'll send the link to this as well. The video. So there's a transcript of her talk that's in that link, and then there's a link to the video, which includes a little talkback session after her talk, which was facilitated by Rabbi David Ingber. David Ingber is an Orthodox rabbi who started up his own shul in Manhattan called Romamu. So you may have heard about Rabbi David Ingber. So he talks to her after her speech on that video. Okay, so let me share my screen and we'll get right to it. So I'm starting here in the talk because we don't need to see all the introduction to it where she talks about the other people over the years who have given this talk. So I want to start here. Her friend Alana, so I think she lists, yes, so this would be Alana Newhouse, I guess. All these people that she's spoken to over the past year, or at least since October 7th, about what's going on in America vis-a-vis Israel and how it affects the rapid rise and exponential growth of anti-Semitism in this country. So my friend Alana likes to joke that the only thing worse than a dumb Jew is a surprised Jew. And yet, even many of us credited with seeing it coming have been in a state of shock. That is, seeing October 7th coming, or the rise of anti-Semitism in America. Why? I can tell you why, because I'm one of them, one of these surprised Jews. I knew anti-Semitism had seduced educated people in other eras, but I did not expect a wave of anti-Semitism to originate with them in ours. That is, again, educated people being the source of this new wave of anti-Semitism in our era. Okay? So, in other words, our time is supposed to be a time of great educational liberalism, intellectual honesty, openness, and that should lead to, if there's increased education and intellectual honesty, then there should be a decrease in bigotry. But the fact that now educated people have gone to, I like to say, go to the dark side, that is, educated people are anti-Semitic and bigoted, that's the issue that she's talking about in her talk. How that could happen and what we do about it. I knew many of our sense-making institutions, higher education, journalism, even our biggest corporation, had become bloated and corrupt. Sense-making institutions, that is, where you go to try to understand the world. All right, there's lots of things happening around us. How do we make sense of all these things happening around us? Well, you take classes to hear from professors to give their opinion about what's happening. You go to journalism to read op-ed articles and pieces to get a perspective. And don't forget, I worked at the New York Times. She left for a reason. But even I did not foresee how avidly so many of these institutions would actively embrace an ideology of illiberalism. I knew people still hated Jews, and that hate was deadly. I knew that intimately. I stood inside Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh as the Chever Kadisha worked alongside the FBI to pick up the pieces of the 11 Jews who were murdered there that morning. So I knew that this evil existed, but I could not imagine how mainstream and shameless, even proud, that hate would become. I thought America was almost a different kind of diaspora, one where Jew hatred surely existed, just as other forms of bigotry unfortunately do, wherever humans live, but where it could never fully take root, as it did throughout history everywhere else, right? Jews in America have taken Jewish life for granted these past several decades because our Jewish life in America has been unique for Jewish life throughout the world, throughout history. Everywhere else the Jews have lived throughout history, that life has been marked by extreme anti-Semitism, if not also persecution, oppression, and violence. Okay? America has been unique. All right, so there is the Jew who was lynched in Atlanta in 1919 or so. His name escapes me, but the Broadway show was a revival of a Broadway show called Parade, all about that, with Ben Platt playing the lead role, a Jewish factory worker in Atlanta framed for the murder of a young factory worker, and he was lynched. So the only, okay, yes, the Jewish freedom riders in Mississippi, but it wasn't necessarily about them being Jewish, it was them being involved in civil rights. Okay, so you can, on one hand, Jews who have been lynched because they're Jews in America until Tree of Life, right? So our diaspora is unique. Our place in America, in the broader Jewish diaspora, is unique. Okay, um, and of course, I thought that this is a country. Why is Bari Weiss not unique among American Jews, thinking that we live in a special place? This is a country whose first president in 1790 wrote a letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, saying that the Jews of this country would possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. Leo Frank, thank you, Bob. He wrote that in the chat. Leo Frank, the Jew in Atlanta who was lynched. He went on, George Washington did, it is now no more that toleration is spoken of, as if it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. George Washington's radical proposition was that Jews would not be, as they always had been in history, second-class citizens in a new America. Rather, freedom would be as natural to the Jews as it was to any other citizen, at least as any other American then recognized as fully human, right? As opposed to blacks who were 3/5 human. The Civil War, fought to make America's promise more real, was still 71 years away. Okay, so 1790, right? Think about what's going on in Europe for Jews in 1790. Jews are still in the ghetto. Jews, there are pogroms always across Europe. And it's 1790, it's not until the early 1800s that Napoleon gives Jews, allows Jews legally to become full citizens of France. Okay, and even then, anti-Semitism is still deeply embedded in all of European society. Okay, so George Washington is making a break with that. So fully did the founders identify with the Israelites that Benjamin Franklin wanted the image on the country's great seal to be Moses parting the Red Sea. Lincoln, as ever, put it perfectly. Americans, he said, were the almost chosen people. All this is why, as the German writer Josef Joffe has noted, America is dotted with biblical place names like Jerusalem, Shiloh, Zion, Canaan, and Goshen, but there is no Shiloh anywhere in Europe. For all these reasons and more, I thought we were immune. Okay, so I want to go on to here. This talk is called the State of World Jewry Address. But if there's a lesson of these past few years, and especially these past 142 days, right? So this was a week ago Sunday, today's 150th day. It is that the state of world Jewry depends on the state of the free world. And right now, its condition, the condition of world Jewry, is in jeopardy. This is a truth known viscerally to Jews today who hail for the unfree world, those from the former Soviet Union, those who were expelled from Iran and other autocratic regimes in the Middle East. And it's a truth faced daily by Jews in places that remain unfree. Just ask the Jews of Tunisia, who in October watched as a historic synagogue was reduced to rubble by a mob driven by false reports that Israel had bombed a hospital in Gaza. But this is a truth that we American Jews have lost sight of on account of our abundant blessings. As our holiday from history ends, right, October 7th led to the end of the holiday, and that led to the realization that anti-Semitism is alive and well in America. As we learn to live inside history once more, it's a truth we urgently need to revive and renew and make real for ourselves. So that is what I want to talk about tonight, how we must become inside and outside free people for the sake of America, for the sake of the free world, and for the sake of the Jews, those who came before us and those yet to come. So then she goes on with a Devar Torah, quite remarkable. It's a beautiful Devar Torah about the golden calf, because last Sunday was the week before this past Shabbat, in which we read the incident of the golden calf in Shul in the portion Kitisa. So she describes the incident of the golden calf, and how is it that while Moses was delayed in coming down the mountain, that Aaron was so willing to build a golden calf. Why did they do it? Why did a people who had just experienced the miracle of their liberation from slavery turn away from the God who had given them their freedom and toward an idol, right? They had just experienced the revelation of God at Mount Sinai. They heard God's voice, and that was 2.5 months after leaving Egypt and experiencing God's miracles. How could they so quickly shift from God back to idols? The rabbis provide many answers. So does the Israeli singer Ehud Banai. These are the lyrics he sings. We are here in the heart of the desert, thirsty for living water. You're on top of the mountain. Above the clouds, there is no sign, no signal. So many days in a closed circuit, we circle around the golden calf. There's no one to hit the rock. Who will give direction? So why did they do it? They did it because they felt anxious and vulnerable and alone. They did it because they lost or thought they lost their connection to God. They did it because they didn't have imagination to conceive of a different future. They did it because they had come from a place that worshiped idols. They imitated what they had grown up with. They reverted to what they knew. So why did they build a calf? Because freedom is so very, very hard. And what about Aaron? Aaron was Moses' right hand. Aaron should have known better, but Aaron capitulates. Why did Aaron do it? He was afraid of what would happen if he didn't accommodate their desires. He did it because he refused to accept, or perhaps could not cope with the fact that the world was in fact changing. So when his flock yearned for the past, he allowed them to slip back into it. So in other words, this one point she's trying to make is that the point in the Torah of the golden calf is that Aaron represents the past and allowing the people to remain in the past. Moses represents the future, and how difficult the path of going forward into the future with new ideas is so difficult. Okay, so there it is, all in a few spare lines written down thousands of years ago, but it is now and it is us. We modern Israelites have also been worshiping false idols. Our American idols are prestige, power, social acceptance, popularity, elite opinion, and the Ivy League. Our idols are the coveted board seat, the best tables, relationships with the pretty people. We put truth on the altar as if it were a tithable commodity, to remain insiders, to have bragging rights. We have been willing to sacrifice what's most precious to us, including our own children, for the sake of it. Why are we doing this? We are doing it because we're a tiny minority, and because we feel vulnerable and scared and alone, and because fitting in feels safer than standing apart. Okay, so Jews in America have always assimilated into the greater society and have always followed what society preaches as the ideals, the prestige, power, social acceptance. We are doing it because we're human beings and so seek temporary pleasure and ease. We're doing it because we feel anxious and unsure. We're doing it because we tell ourselves that accommodation is the best route to safety. We're doing it because we also live in a culture of idolatry. Only this time the materials are pixels and diplomas, adherence to a particular ideology, and an emergent social credit system based on likes and retweets. That's the culture that we're living in today, a culture of idolatry, a culture of retweets, social media. We're doing it because maybe deep down, we don't believe we are capable of more. We're doing it because freedom, real, true freedom, is so very hard. And what of our Aarons? Why do so many charged with leading our community not offer leadership, but coping mechanisms? Perhaps they are afraid. Perhaps in times of disruption, it can be hard to know where the worst of the danger resides. Perhaps, too, they're afraid of the mob because they're afraid of what happens if they don't accommodate our basest instincts. Perhaps because they have sincerely come to believe that erasing or playing down what makes us different is the way to prove we are inclusive. Right? So avoid the fact of highlighting how unique the Jewish community is or Jewish concepts are. We're afraid to be a part. We want to be a part of, as opposed to standing apart. And that it's and we are afraid of that because possibly we want to, because by standing apart, maybe we're saying we're not inclusive. And inclusive is a big word today. About how to accommodate, welcome everybody. Everybody is beautiful. Everybody has something to contribute to the community. So if you're standing apart, you're saying you don't believe in the rest of the community. You don't want to be part of them. Or perhaps they cannot come to terms with the fact that the world they were born into is very much not the world of today. They entertain dead ideas or dead paradigms or indulge in nostalgia for dead alliances because they can't conceive of the fact that we are inside a cataclysmic change, every bit as disorienting as the one our ancestors lived through when they went uncertain through the Red Sea and into the desert to become a liberated people. So let me not leave this stage tonight before saying this again and underscoring it. We are at a hinge moment in history. Our world is changing. Ask the people of ask the people of southern Israel who saw on the morning of October 7th how brittle the fence is that separates civilization from barbarism. Ask the people of Taiwan who hear Beijing's threats and wonder how soon the dark shadow that has fallen over Hong Kong might consume them too. Ask the people of Ukraine. Ask the Navalny family. In one of the beautiful letters Alexei Navalny sent from a prison cell in the Arctic Circle to Natan Sharansky in Jerusalem. He had a correspondence with Natan Sharansky. It's the first I'm hearing of it when I read this a couple of days ago, that Alexei Navalny, the protester to Putin, who died in prison or was killed by the Russian authorities, had an ongoing correspondence with Natan Sharansky, who himself was Russian and was a refusenik, right? Famously set free 40 years ago. Okay, so he wrote to Sharansky of how strange it was to be reading Sharansky's memoir, Fear No Evil, about his time in the Gulag 40 years before, right? So Navalny reading Sharansky's memoir of being in the exact same situation that Navalny was. I was amused by the fact that neither the essence of the system nor the pattern of its acts has changed, Navalny writes. In the current situation, it is not them who are to blame, writing of the KGB, but us, who naively thought that there was no going back to the old ways, right? Some in Russia thought that with the tearing down of the Iron Curtain in Germany, that would, and the so-called democracy in Russia was there to stay, but it was just an outward appearance. The old ways were still there. Let me repeat that. Us, who naively thought that there was no going back to the old ways, can the same not be said of us? Because freedom isn't only under siege in Russia and Iran and Hong Kong, it's also under siege here at home. So here are some examples of how freedom is under siege in America by leftists who glorify terrorists and by rightists who glorify tyrants, by technology companies that revise history and tell us it's justice, by demagogues who point to the grocery stores and the subway system in Putin's Russia and insist that they are symbols of human flourishing, and by an elite culture that has so lost all sense of right and wrong, good and bad, or has so cunningly transformed those categories that it can call a massacre resistance, a genocidal chant a call for freedom. That is, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. That's a genocidal chant. And a just war of self-defense, genocide. Human nature is full of riddles, wrote the famous Soviet dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn. One of those riddles is, how is it that the people who have been crushed by the sheer weight of slavery and cast to the bottom of the pit can nevertheless find strength in themselves to rise up and free themselves, first in spirit and then in body, while those who soar unhampered over the peaks of freedom suddenly lose the taste for it, lose the will to defend it, and hopelessly confused and lost, almost begin to crave slavery. He wrote those words in another place and time, but their warning rings like an alarm across our own. Ours has been the freest country in the history of the world, and yet so many today seem to long for slavery, or at the very least, have lost their ability to tell freedom from servitude. To say that this turn against liberty, the foundational value of this country, our New Jerusalem, is bad for Jews is as self-evident as it once was to declare that Lincoln was a hero, or that Frederick Douglass was a second founding father, or that America is the last best hope on earth. Where liberty thrives, Jews thrive. Where difference is celebrated, Jews are celebrated. Where freedom of thought and faith and speech are protected, Jews are safest. And when such virtues are regarded as threats, Jews will be regarded as the same. In other words, when people turn against freedom, they turn against us. So it should not surprise us that our safety, as well as our freedom, are contracting right now in real time. And not just for Jews, of course, but anyone who refuses to surrender truth. There are now whole realms of American life where you cannot be free as a Jew. The example of a Jewish school teacher in Queens, the example of Matisyahu, a Jewish rock star, who 2 of his concerts were canceled by venues after anti-Israel activists planned protests. Princeton University student journalist Alexandra Orbach, applying for a job as a curator at MoMA, mention you're a Zionist or have the word Israel on your resume, see what happens. There's been willful ignorance on the part of our Jewish elders to what's happened here, in part because they have supported and funded so many of these institutions. But I promise you, if your child wants to go into the arts or music or publishing or higher education and is a proud supporter of Israel, they will face an uphill battle. At this point, I'm not even sure they'll get through the door at the Jewish Museum, whose own curator now likes From the River to the Sea posts on Instagram. In other words, so what that means, the curator of the Jewish Museum is on Instagram and he likes. That's just an action that you do on social media to show that you agree with a post. And the curator of the Jewish Museum agrees with From the River to the Sea. I mentioned that last one because it's important to notice that it's not only that other institutions have turned against us, it's that we have turned against ourselves. So what do we do? The charge is as simple as it is spiritually difficult. We fulfill our duty and our responsibility to be free. As my friend, the brilliant Dara Horn, has written, since ancient times, that's Everybody Loves a Dead Jew, that's the latest book that she wrote last year. Since ancient times, in every place they have ever lived, Jews have represented the frightening prospect of freedom. As long as Jews existed in any society, there was evidence that it, in fact, wasn't necessary to believe what everyone else believed, and that those who disagreed with their neighbors could survive and even flourish against all odds. Just want to stop there. That's what keeping Jews alive meant, and that's why it was important to keep Jews separate. Because if society is run by the church, and the church believes that the church represents a new religion, hence New Testament versus Old Testament, and that everybody should be believing in Jesus and the new religion, then keeping around the old religion allows for another option, that everybody doesn't have to be part of the new religion. So it's a simplistic, overgeneralized way of looking at history, but I think there's value to that perspective. That's one way to look at it. Why were Jews put in a ghetto? Why were Jews persecuted? Why were Jews driven out of Spain? Why were Jews driven out of almost every country they'd ever gone to? It's because the ruling authorities, based on Christian advice, said you can't have Jews around because they represent some other choice that we don't want people to be aware of. So the Jews' continued distinctiveness, despite overwhelming pressure to become like everyone else, demonstrated their enormous effort to cultivate that freedom, devotion to law and story, deep literacy, and an absolute obsessiveness about transmitting those values between generations. The existence of Jews in any society is a reminder that freedom is possible, but only with responsibility, and that freedom without responsibility is no freedom at all. But that freedom, that responsibility is a choice for us, as it has always been, including for those Israelites addicted to the fleshpots of Egypt who chose not to leave slavery. What does this choice look like? What does it look like to be free, to practice freedom? To be free is to tell the truth, even in a world awash with lies. That is, to stand up to conspiracy theories that are rampant on social media. The sky is blue. Robin DiAngelo might say it's pink. Candace Owens might say it's green, but it's not, it's blue. That is as true as asserting that there are good governments and evil ones. There are societies organized to generate progress and well-being, and those organized around terror and debasement. There are better cultures for women and minorities, and there are worse ones. There are historical truths, even if they're inconvenient for people to know about, even if the activists running places like Google are frantically working to disappear the old facts. Here's Solzhenitsyn again. Let the lie come into the world, let it even triumph, but not through me. To be a free person is to refuse to tell lies, to refuse to stand by as they are told. To be a free person is to live in truth. So that's action item number 1 to combat anti-Semitism, is to stand up to truth, for truth. To be free is to stand up for other people's freedom, but, and this is crucial, not when it means ending your own. When Martin Luther King Jr. said that peace for Israel means security and that security must be a reality, he wasn't paying back Jewish supporters or returning a favor to Abraham Joshua Heschel for standing with him at Selma. Heschel stood with King because it was the right thing to do for African Americans, for Jews, for Americans, just as King understood that depriving Israel, a small country surrounded by enemies, of the ability to defend itself like any other country would pave the way to its destruction. Many Jews of my generation, and old Jews too, have since October 7th felt a terrible sense of abandonment by so-called allies. But it's worth asking ourselves if the shock is the sense of betrayal or the realization that we were not in fact united, like King and Heschel, by a shared set of values to begin with. Right? So it's the realization today that maybe there are different value systems at play here in American so-called intellectual, liberal, progressive society and Jewish society, which Jews have always felt a bond with the progressive, intellectual liberals of America. Okay, and now perhaps we're feeling betrayed because that sense of alliance is now seems to be false and is crashing down. The civil rights movement was about expanding freedom for those who have been deprived of it. It had been an expansive view of equality. It had an expansive view of equality. It argued that because our rights were God-given and because we were all created equal, that equality under the law must follow. Many who claim the mantle as the inheritors of that movement defile it. They say progress is suspect or impossible. Instead of working to perfect the union, they argue for the abolition of it. They argue that every institution in society must treat groups of people very, very differently. The movement says there are too many Jewish and Asian doctors. Their MCAT scores should be judged against a different ledger. If your allies are subdividing people by racial category, fixing inherited qualities to one group or another, counting the representation of each group to see if it exceeded the distribution in the population, then they, however well-intentioned, are anything but. To be free is to be willing to stand apart. And Leah Goldstein, who was disinvited from speaking at a Women's Day event in Ottawa because she had served in the IDF 30 years ago, said the organizers originally wanted a statement from her, no doubt hoping for a disavowal of her past. Instead, what did Leah tell the Jewish Telegraph? If I were to make a statement, I would say that I'm very proud of my training with the IDF, being the first woman to train the commando soldiers. The other day, I interviewed the economist Roland Fryer, among the freest people I've ever encountered, having withstood a modern witch burning at Harvard for his refusal to lie about facts incompatible with the prevailing narrative. I asked him how he did it. He said something that stopped me in my tracks. I do not covet what they covet. Or as the Hebrew National put it, I answer to a higher authority. That's the beginning of freedom. That brings me to another group who is free. Students like Bella Ingber, Talia Khan, Eyal Yacobi, and others are free. They are our 21st century Davids staring down Goliaths without trembling at the knee. If you want to learn how to be free, look at their powerful example. To be free is to stand up and fight. These are students at Yale University, I believe, or no, students at Ivy League colleges coming together to stand up to the anti-Semitism that is rampant on college campus. To be free is to stand up and fight for the freest country in the history of the world. The United States was 87 years old when Abraham Lincoln declared a new birth of freedom. The country was still in the midst of fighting a great war, and Lincoln was standing on a battlefield that doubled as a graveyard. Yet he was there to argue for a new beginning, that he used a biblical formulation, 7 years, borrowing from the book that has long made the story of the Jewish people so intimately bound up with the American Republic, was no more surprising than that his name was Abraham, the first Jew, the Jew who stood alone to proclaim one God in a world of idols. A century and a half later, no one is asking us to go to war. No one is asking us to give up our firstborn. No one is asking us to believe that a sea in front of us will split in half before it drowns us. What is being asked of us is to give up what feels central to our lives, but isn't. To stop caring so much where your kid goes to college, to give up that museum board seat, to stop funding schools that treat Israel as a pariah and thus Jews who support it as the same, to detach from the friend or institution that has made clear that to them, you are a second-class citizen. Do you not see how lucky we are that these are the only sacrifices we have to make? When the bar for bravery is leaving a job at a newspaper, privilege is truly the only word to describe it, right? You don't have to give up your life to fight for being a Jew. In America, you just have to stand up for something, and you might be giving up a job or a seat at a board table. And it's time to go to war for our values. When Apple's diversity chief, a Black woman, was forced to step down for saying that being a minority or a woman are not the only criteria for diversity, did you take her side? When Asian Americans were discriminated against, did you see their causes being essential to our own? When American doctors were censored for questioning the efficacy of lockdowns, were you as outraged about this as you were about people who refused to wear masks in March of 2020? When just across town, a statue of Teddy Roosevelt was removed from outside the American Museum of Natural History, did you protest? We glance at these things, feel a twinge of discomfort, and then decide to move on, giving ourselves one excuse after another. But these are the moments for action because they are wrong. They are bad for America, and because they're bad for America, they're bad for Jews. To be free is to be courageous even when we are scared. On the morning of October 7th, ordinary Israelis left their offices, closed their laptops, and abandoned their fields to pick up weapons, in many cases without waiting for instructions from the state or its army. These men and women have displayed the kind of heroism that many of them belong to the mythic past or the generation of 1948 when the armies of 5 invading Arab nations turned every kibbutz and moshav and every town and village into a battlefield. Surely such individual and collective courage had become something to be studied in the past, not enacted in the present, not inside the land of Israel, not in the 21st century, and certainly not by them. And yet here they were, ordinary heroes who understood that history had come knocking and knew that meant they had a critical role to play in shaping it. Their instincts in defense of freedom were immediate and unqualified. For this they are and will continue to be my inspiration, and they should be yours. I do not know what will come next for America or for the Jewish people, any more than the Israelites who left Egypt and stood beneath the fire at Sinai. Things are uncertain. What I know is that our tradition teaches us that the seal of God is truth. What I know is that the story of the Jewish people is a story of freedom. And what I know is that story rings out across space and time in a common struggle against tyranny. Navalny knew that when he quoted the last line of the Passover Seder. Here, I copied you it for myself from the book L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim, a shared promise of freedom passed between a Christian prisoner of conscience, soon to be murdered by Putin in his Arctic cell, and a former Soviet prisoner free as a Jew in Jerusalem. Fighting the lies against us, fighting the lies against history, living in truth, it feels good. It's relaxing to tell the truth. You'll laugh more. Not that I'm here selling a new cure for depression, but I promise this is a start. What a blessing to be free to choose. I know what my choice will be. I am determined to be free. Thank you for having me. So, it's a powerful talk from Bari Weiss. I'm sure if you watch the video of it, it'll be more powerful than just reading the words on a page. But it says a lot about inspiring us to understand what our Jewish values are, and that our Jewish values stand the test of time and force us to take a stand today. That we can't just give in to social pressure, to social media. We can't just think that having a seat at the table, whatever table that is, will ensure our safety. We have to understand, and security, we have to understand that it's the values. We're standing up for the values, is what will make us free, and getting America back to its values, it will ensure our freedom. So a powerful talk. Any thoughts, questions, or comments about it that you want to share? Bob, it looks like you're about, yes, go ahead, Bob.
Thank you for sharing that. But I was curious, the director of the museum, was that the museum in Philly?
No, I think she's talking about there's the Jewish Museum, the Museum of Jewish Heritage. So I'm not, you know what? I'm not sure. I don't
Okay.
remember what she was referring to. So I'm not sure if that's the American Jewish History Museum in Philadelphia or some other, or she's talking about no, the Jewish Museum is on the Upper West Side. That's called the Jewish Museum. So there's
Okay.
so I think it's that's simply called the Jewish Museum. Okay, as
Okay.
opposed to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is on the on the Lower East Side, the near Wall Street or below Wall Street. There's a Museum of Jewish Heritage there, or the American Jewish, yeah, Jewish Museum, Upper West Side. So I think that's what
Okay.
she's talking about. So if you Google that, you might find that reference that she's talking about. Any other thoughts or comments? So it's quite a remarkable talk. It was quite stunning to me the first time I read through it. And it's also worth it, like I said, to look at the video and go to the end of it, scroll to the end of it to see the talk back with Rabbi David Ingber. That's valuable too. So there is work to be done. It's a it's a crisis that we're living through right now. The upcoming election in November isn't going to make it any easier, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done and we should take leadership roles in that, advocating for these true American Jewish values. So have a good rest of the day, everybody, and see you next Monday on another Jews in the News. Take care.
Ja, Yashar.
Thanks.